Good morning. You're watching the BLAINESWORLD show or listening to it, whatever the case may be. And this is a podcast that can be found each week on Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn. You can also listen on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. And you can also get more information and listen to previous shows at our website, www.blainesworld.net. I'm your host, Blaine Greenfield, and here in my Zoom studio in lovely Fairview, North Carolina. And each week we focus on positive news and information about people and organizations in both Western North Carolina and throughout the country. And toward that end, it's my pleasure to introduce author and retired teacher, Kae Mance. And Kae, you can feel free to wave to all your fans and friends who are watching this on Facebook or wherever they're watching it. And Kae's background has been the fact that she inspires others. That's always been near and dear to her heart, whether helping students with reading challenges or with her work as a special education teacher. Nowadays, she's helping others through her book, Living Well and Die Well, and Living Well to Die Well, a guide for terminal ill people and their loved ones. I'll talk a little bit about the book and how to get it. But I have to tell you, first of all, Kae, this is just a fantastic book, and I just thank you for writing it.
Thank you.
And before we get into the book and some of the work you're doing now, what I typically like to ask is when I meet somebody for the first time, you grew up as a child where?
In my early years outside of Pittsburgh, and then moved to Charleston, South Carolina when I was 13.
Okay, and when you were growing up outside Pittsburgh and Charleston, did you always know you wanted to be an educator and then an author?
I never thought about being an author. I only thought about being an educator. I actually wrote the book that was published most recently in 2010, and then Living Well, I wrote just this past November and December. But I always wanted to be a teacher.
And so when did you come to that realization?
About being an author?
No, becoming a teacher.
I don't know. I always liked school and enjoyed children. They are so honest. And I really can't tell you when I came to that realization, but when I went to college, there was no question about it for me.
You were you were a special ed teacher, is that correct?
Yeah, I started out teaching autistic children, which is where I met my husband, who started the first program for autistic children in the state of South Carolina. And I worked there for a while, and then I was a special ed consultant for a number of years. Then I started the first preschool special ed program in Charleston County and ran that for a number of years and got tired of the bureaucracy of running a program as it grew and went back in the classroom and was never sorry that I did that. I went back and taught kindergarten and first grade and really became enamored of reading and the process of reading. And then I got cancer the first time. And when I recovered from that, I had a tutoring business that I specialized in teaching kids to read, that no one was able to do that.
And you also wrote a book about that, or you wrote your first book was about reading?
Right, Reading Tricks for Jordan. And it teaches the process, explains the process of reading, the different kinds of cue systems that children use, how to do that, how to respond to it, to build independence in reading. And the book has a detailed teacher guide, but then it also tells a story. And Jordan was our second born son, and reading did not come easily for him. And I named it after him because I wish I had known then what I learned later by studying children and how they learn. And the story itself is about a little boy named Jordan, and the teacher is teaching the classroom these reading tricks, because kids don't like rules, but they like tricks.
Did it become easier for Jordan reading?
Pardon me?
It did reading become easier for your son?
He had a wonderful second grade teacher that brought him up to level. And our first son read at 4, was writing his own little books at 5. But I've told so many parents that by the end of 3rd grade, you really can't tell who read early and who didn't. They all catch up unless they have a significant learning disability.
Is Jordan a reader now? Does he read?
Yes, he's a software engineer.
Okay.
And is very successful.
And you have me interested now. I'll just put you on the spot. One trick, for example, I have to read the book, but can you share one trick that you did with Jordan?
Well, I learned the tricks, wrote the book when Jordan is now 37, and
Right.
I wrote it in 2010. So he was definitely grown. But if children are reading on their correct instructional level, which is 90 to 94% accuracy, if all they do is go back to the beginning of the sentence and reread, they can often figure it out 80% of the time. But they've got to attend to pictures. They've got to listen to themselves read, think about the story. And then there is a super trick that works 99% of the time. But I'm going to leave that a mystery.
Okay. Well, then, since you tease us with it, I'll ask you to just repeat the name of the book is what?
Reading Tricks for Jordan.
Okay. And is that available Amazon or elsewhere?
On Amazon. And it has a copyright, so it will be available at retailers as they learn about it.
Okay. So certainly, definitely a book that if any parents out there, grandparents, and want to help their kids read, they should get a hold of this book, and then they'll learn all your tricks, right? Not just
That's right.
Okay, great. So you were teaching elementary school. You wrote that one book. What gave you the idea to write the second book that we're talking about now?
Well, I was diagnosed with terminal cancer the end of last June. And I let people know that I was close friends and relatives. And most people were very supportive and caring. The only thing I asked of anyone was to stay connected. And some people didn't, because the topic of death, even when it's not happening to you, is so uncomfortable to so many people that I was surprised there were a few people that chose to cut off communication with me rather than have to think about it or address this. My doctors have told me that I am a rare bird, that not only the cancer I have is very rare, but that most people are not open and want to know the truth about their condition from the beginning.
Well, most people, it's sad in a way too. Not only don't want to know their condition, I guess, but also don't want to talk about it. You know, I think you're somewhat rare in that sense too. I know my dad was one who didn't want to talk about it, you know, and that's a shame, because I guess I missed the opportunity to get to know him better and to find out more. And I guess other people missed it as well, but he just didn't want to, you know, let it out there, or that, you know, he wasn't well. And that's a lot of folks are like that.
Yes, more people are like that than not, has been my experience. And from what I hear from my doctors, it's been their experience as well.
Even in terms of discussing things with your doctors, some folks don't even want to discuss things with their doctors or find out what's happening, or what's that all about?
Yes, I told my doctors from the beginning I wanted to know everything. I wanted complete honesty, that quality of life meant more to me than quantity. And they asked me a lot of questions. I lost both my siblings to very rare cancers, and they handled it totally differently. My sister was in complete denial, as was her whole family. And my brother and I certainly learned from that and how it did not work. And so when he was diagnosed, he was very open and honest, and talked about it and told everyone that he wanted joy in every day. He didn't want to leave any words unsaid, and he didn't. And that included talking to his elementary school-aged grandchildren. And they have all come out of that experience in much better shape than what my sister's family endured.
And listening to you, I'm saying that I didn't have that experience either in terms of discussing things, because I guess for some people, and maybe even me, it's a hard thing to do, or they don't want to look at it, as opposed to being kind of an important thing to do. And let me ask you, there are about 18 chapters are my favorite chapters in the book, but one, and I think there are only 17 chapters, but I love the one chapter you called chapter 3, it was the best advice. And if you can give a shout out to the doctor, actually, which amazing story as well. But you talk a little bit about that advice.
When I was diagnosed, one of the first people I called after, we talked with family was Dr. Rob Pennington, who is our older son's godfather and a PhD psychologist, and the most positive person we probably ever met. And he had stage 4 pancreatic cancer, but you would never know from talking to him. And I called him, and he gave me 2 pieces of advice, which I have not had any better advice. The first was that I could not control what was happening to me. I cannot control the cancer, but I can control my response to it. And his other piece of advice was, when you find yourself in a perfectly miserable situation, why make it worse by being perfectly miserable?
What a great line, isn't that? Wow.
Isn't that a great line? And it's so true, because I could choose to be sad, feel sorry for myself, be angry, but none of those things serves me. It doesn't help me in any way. By looking at life that way, I can make the most of the life I have left, however long that is. And like my brother, I want to experience joy in every day. I don't want people to treat me differently. I'm still the same person. I'm just sick.
One of the disappointments, perhaps in my life, was that I had a good friend. I always remember, Kay, that I wanted to visit him with a bunch of his other friends, and we wanted to bring pizza and just celebrate, and he wouldn't let us. He back to your miserable quote, I guess he just wanted to be by himself. But I was disappointed in that, even telling the story now. And what a shame, because I liked him very much and I wanted to be with him. But some people do that. They just kind of crawl into a corner and don't want to be miserable, I guess, and by themselves. And I guess you have to respect that.
You do have to respect it. But you can also send cards and be positive. I encourage people not to so much try and change their minds because some people who have used denial their whole life to handle challenges are probably going to go into denial if they get a terminal diagnosis. And we have to respect that. It doesn't mean we have to stop communicating. If they don't want to be called, they don't want to see us, we can send cards, send emails, and say, I always discourage saying, how are you? Because I mean, we're dying. And either we feel like, oh, I don't want to say, I'm feeling horrible when we're feeling wretched. And I don't want to lie about it either. But you can say things like, it's so great to, have some time with you. It really means a lot that if you would let me come over and visit, and I'll stay 15 minutes and then do just that. But to me, it is helpful to me to be around people because that's life for me. It's always been being around lots of people.
It reminds me of a quote my dad used, which I loved, that if people would ask how he was, and you're right, it's not a great question to ask because there's not much you can do with it, But he would say, okay, I loved it. He would say, 97% great, 3% not so great, and it made people feel better because it was a great way of looking at things,
Yeah, my husband suggests, which I think is a good one too, the best I can.
Okay.
I'm doing the best I can.
but what I like so much what you said, and I hope other people are watching or listening and they'll get this out of it, is that perhaps the most important thing I'm hearing you say is just not to forget people, and just to not ignore them because they're going to eventually go away, but not right away, and they're still with you. Yeah.
Right. And cancer can run on for a long time. Some people go through it for years. Mine is more likely to be months. But and people are always there at the beginning when you're diagnosed. But it's hard to remember that our life is going on and it's still hard. It continues to be hard while other people are having wonderful things happen in their lives. And I love to hear about those things. I love to hear about weddings and births and all the happy things going on because that gives me happiness too. I get plenty of conversation about cancer with my doctors. It's not a topic of conversation that I necessarily want to have that often, though I'm very comfortable talking about it.
But, it's also, you're saying with, I guess, loved ones, significant others, it also becomes the same old thing, so you don't have to, repeat it every time you have a phone call, that I'm sure they'll hear the news from you or your husband and important stuff. But you'd rather, I guess what you're saying is talk about other things than your health.
Yes, and I send out the Mance medical update about once a month to all our family members and close friends so that I don't have to repeat it over and over again. I try and keep it lighthearted but honest and include other things in it about what I'm doing.
By the way, what a great recommendation for anybody who's listening to this. If they aren't doing well, rather than having to make 73 phone calls about the same issue, just put it in writing and then say, I love that. What do you call that again?
The Mance medical update.
Okay, no, that's a great idea. And thank you for sharing that. Talk about some other things let's talk about, again, I'd say two of my other favorite chapters, but the one I'm trying to get the chapter number, you'll probably know it. But you have this great list of things that I never thought about. Yeah, here it is. Suggestions for what to do and not to do, And I guess because nobody ever thought about it, or you were a teacher, I was a teacher, nobody ever taught us this,
It's not written down anywhere.
Well, it is now if they buy the book.
It is now. Yeah. But it really was the experience. And some of the things that I suggest not to do, I feel certain I said myself with the best of intentions. And in the course I help teach about living to die well, when I went over this, and it has been the favorite chapter of just about everyone, the difference was I explained why I made the recommendations, and the response has been, oh, well, that makes sense. I think the most surprising one is don't say to someone who's seriously ill, call me if you need anything.
Right.
Because what you've done is you've given us one more thing to do. And believe me, anyone who's seriously ill has a lot to do. It's like, then if we need something, we've got to go trick-or-treating through our contact list and think, well, would she do this? Would he be willing to do that? If they're not comfortable doing it, would they tell me? And before I publish this book, I have a number of friends with cancer that they'll always have it. They will not go into remission. And then also with Rob, and none of them ever calls anyone who says that. And some people see it, I know that it's the best of intentions, but some people see it as a cop-out. Well, I offered and she didn't call, so I can feel okay.
Well, let me ask you as an alternative then, and great advice to saying that, Kate, what should people say?
What I suggest is that they decide what they're comfortable doing, are able to do, and offer that. If you're willing to bring a meal, call and say, I'd like to bring you a meal next week. Is Tuesday or Thursday or Saturday better for you? Are there any dietary restrictions?
An alternate choice, given either way, you're going to get the meal.
Choices. Right. If it's running errands or, willingness to get my labs or appointments or whatever, say, I'd like to help you with transportation. Now, I don't need that yet. And I've had that offer, and I've also had offer of meals. And what I've said is, I don't need that yet, but we will in the future. And the person said, well, may I check back with you in a month? And I said, yes, that'd be great. Or my church, I had someone call from the church and ask me, and I said, not now, but I promise you, I will call you when that time comes.
Okay. But at least it's nice they made the offer, and they made it.
Right. And I appreciated it, and I will need it. I don't need it yet. And so we want to be as independent as we can be for as long as possible. But those people all offered, specific things that they wanted to do and were able to do.
The list of things you give is just amazing. And I like how you did this on both things, what to do, and things, what not to do. Again, I'll just put you on the spot for maybe one of each, one more. So something that people living with, again, you say living well to die well, a guide for ill people and their loved ones. What else should somebody do if they are in a condition that either they're living with somebody who has terminal illness, or they know somebody who does? What's something else that you recommend that people do?
Remember that we're the same person. I don't want anyone walking on eggshells around me. I want them to use humor. Most I want is for them to stay connected. The other thing that comes up with some people, and it has come up with me, is from the beginning, having been through cancer before 14 years ago, I decided from the beginning I was not going to have IV chemo. And I also very nicely let it be known that if anyone didn't agree with the decision I'd made or my doctor's recommendations, that I would prefer they keep that to themselves. Because no one knows all that goes through to making a decision. I mean, I talked with my doctor. I do research at reputable sites. My husband and I talk. Our sons have just said unequivocally from the beginning, we support you, whatever your decision, Mom. And some people think that's fine to set those limits, but only if they agree with them.
Right.
Most people respect them, but it shouldn't ever happen, I don't think, because it's hard to make those decisions. And for me to accept what's happening to me. The other thing that very well-meaning people say is, Kay, I know there's a miracle with your name on it. They're coming out with new treatments every day. You never know when they're going to come up with a new treatment for your cancer. The reality is neither of those things happen very often, and treatments don't come out every day. And if they did come out, my doctor would know about them. But my miracle is that I've been able to accept this and be at peace about it and not afraid. And that's what I tell them, that that's my miracle.
Beautiful answer. And I think it also ties into the idea that people want to give advice. And I guess that's okay if you're seeking it, but I guess, you've done so much research, your husband, the family, that you don't necessarily need advice from other people in terms of how to deal with your illness.
The other thing is that people who try and give advice are not experiencing what I'm experiencing.
Right.
And there's no way for someone who doesn't have a terminal illness to understand what I'm going through. I mean, it's just, you can't. And I remember someone saying to me, "Oh, I know exactly how you feel." And I said, respectfully, you don't know.
And so that's, again, I guess you're hearing you say that's not another great thing not to say to folks. I understand how you're feeling. They don't, so just leave alone or empathize, whatever. Okay, let me ask you, in our remaining time here, there's another chapter we don't have to talk about it, but I'd like to talk about. And this alone is, I think, worth the price of the book. And it's just the chapter where you're talking about to-do lists, and things people need to do. And what's so unusual, you told me off the air, is that you were developing a lot of this because you felt it was needed. And talk specifically about, for example, the financial issue or the financial records.
Yes, I've known people who have had a spouse die, and that spouse took care of all the finances. Right. I've always done the finances in our 43 years of marriage. And so that was the very first thing I did, was get the finances all organized. I had a list of income and expenses while I was still living, and then after I would die. I made up an end-of-life binder that it has all the passwords for accounts. Our son, who's the software engineer, recommended that we open a new account that was just for financial things. And so that my husband would know that's where any bills are coming in. I've set up everything on auto pay that can be done that way. I've always had made up a checklist in the order of for our taxes, in the order the account wants it. And this year I did that. And then I gave all the information to my husband, and he tried to do it, and it was hard. So we had to do it together. And I've even made up one for next year when I probably will not be here. But also in this thing, I have people need to make sure they have a living will so that the family knows what they want. A will, a very clear will that's registered, so that, because I have known some families that I would have bet money there would not be a problem, and it has split up the family. Well, what I want, as far as we're choosing to be cremated, what I want for my service, and in fact, I wrote my own obituary.
I saw that, yeah.
And I tell people, there really is some humor in this. I designed my own celebration of life service, and I even have a little letter that's going to be read. It says something about how, well, this is the last captive audience I'm going to have.
Okay.
And I chose the music, each piece of music, for a reason. And And it took me about 2 months to do that. But I have everything together in one box. And when I die, Andy will pick it up. He'll need to make about 3 phone calls. And I have another son who has an email list who sends it out to notify people of my death and the service, because I don't want it all falling on Andy, my husband.
Just you're giving such great advice, but let me ask you, apropos of that, in terms of the recommendations you're giving, do you, for example, have any pets? The family have any pets?
We do. We have a dog.
Right. So I tell people to make plans for your pets if anything ever happens to the both of you. Hopefully it won't ever happen. But so many people, okay, it's sad, pass, and then nobody's ever thought about the dog or the pets, whatnot. And so they have to be in the thinking process. And I'm just curious, you've done all this work. Has your husband done any of this work on his end? Meaning, yeah.
Actually, he has done some work, because when we went to the funeral home, he said, give me one of those packets. I'm going to take care of this too.
Right. No, but I'm saying because it's so important, Kate, because hopefully, everything's been thought of, but if something happens to him or, that it's not thrown to you or the kids, it's nice, because I always contend, Kate, if we don't think of this and take care of it, you're going to create what a burden for other people. So I guess it's just making their life easier.
Yes. In fact, the dog is taken care of, though she is 17, and I'm not sure which one will outlive the other of us. But we have had plans for our children since our first child was born, and he's now 41, and an attorney. But the person who's going to settle our estate is an attorney that we've known since she was 2 years old. And our son said, we get along great. There won't be any problem. We've said, we're so glad we're not taking any chances.
And I so appreciate the advice you're giving to people, because you're kind of reminding me, my wife and I used to have it. We didn't do it last year. What we called a contingency day. And that was the day after a day after Christmas, December 26th. We would sit down when we're in good spirits, good attitude, and go over all these details, as opposed to when you have to, when you're forced into going over the details. But now you're giving, with the book, of course, you're giving the additional stuff to look in the checklist. It's too bad you must have another business to do in your spare time. You could offer this as a service to people. I'm serious, actually. What a service you offer to people, that you would help them. But this is why you wrote the book, I guess, to go through these steps.
It is, and I never planned to write a book. After I finished with the course, I would wake up early in the morning, like at 4 or 5, and my mind was racing. And I would get up and go up to my computer and just write, because there was just so much on my mind. And I'd written maybe 25 pages or so. And my former principal, who is also a dear friend, had written a book during COVID. And so I didn't say anything to anyone about what I was writing, but I sent it to him and I said, do you think I might have a book here? And he wrote me back and he said, I definitely think you have a book here. And so he offered to edit as I wrote, and he said he had trouble keeping up.
Oh.
And then I had content. I sent it to people for content editing, a hospice doctor, a psychiatrist, a social worker specialized in terminally ill people and those with cancer, 2 ministers, because I wanted people to try and look at it from all the different angles and give me feedback. And I was really pleased that I got very little feedback. The psychiatrist made some great suggestions, which I included in the book, on how to use it, depending on your role, whether you're the one who's sick or you're a loved one.
Well, I'm telling you, I read it and I'm saying to myself, I have to have my wife read this book. It's so, good and comprehensive. I'm going to ask you to mention, cover two final things if we can, Kay. First of all, the name of the book is Living Well to Die Well, and the subtitle is Great: A Guide for Terminally Ill People and Their Loved Ones by Kae Mance. How do people get this book if they want it?
They can order it on Amazon. It will also be for sale on next Monday evening when I do a presentation.
Okay. And by the way, that's you're ahead of me. Thank you. So that's
no,
I wanted to ask you that question. So if you're as impressed with Kay as I am, we're going to invite you, if you're anywhere near Weaverville, North Carolina, to come to Kay's presentation. And why don't you talk a little bit about that, Kay?
Actually, someone approached me and asked me if I would be willing to do it, and I said yes. And she went to the we have a new community center, which is 15 minutes north of Asheville, and the town, the vice mayor and the person who is head of programming for the community center and others got together, and it just took off, and they've done all the marketing. I mean, they have all the setup ready. They've really done everything. All I have to do is show up and talk and then sign books.
And also wait for the standing ovation to end, after the presentation. But Kay, if I could just mention, I'm just checking the date on that. That's going to be Monday. What's the date of that?
It's April 2nd from 7 to 8:30.
And it's one of the beautiful facilities in the area. It's Weaverville. What do they call it? The Center for?
It's called the Weaverville Center for Creative and Healthy Living. Okay. And it's right across from Lake Louise off Merriman Avenue.
And all you have to do is just, if you want to look it up, just Google it and you'll find the center and they'll tell you about the date. Definitely a presentation you want to attend. It's a beautiful facility, and people are invited to come to that. Beautiful thing about the center, there's no charge. You just invite the public to come. If folks want to get in touch with you, they can read the book, they can come to the presentation. Is there any other way they get in touch with you? Facebook or any other way you want to share, people get in touch?
I am on Facebook. I actually have had a couple people message me on Facebook with questions or comments. So that's a way.
Okay. Anyway, and even better, you get a chance to meet Kay if you can make the presentation. But if you can't make the presentation, definitely read the book. And Kay, I'll mention one thing about the book. You say it's a guide for terminally ill people and their loved ones. I would encourage other people to read it as well. Because
it's really for everyone, because I don't think any of us will ever live our lives without either coming in contact with someone who has cancer or a family member or ourselves. I mean, the percentages are high because most of this applies to people who are just going through cancer treatment, whether or not you have a terminal diagnosis. It still applies, and it applies to make it easier on our loved ones when we die. And that's been my whole purpose. And I've really seen this after, I definitely went through sadness. I was never angry or bargaining because there was no one to be angry at. So, but I've seen opportunities that, had I not known I was going to die earlier than expected, that I wouldn't have done. One thing I did was, we have an 18-month-old grandson, and he's our only grandchild. And I made a book for him with lots of pictures of us and pictures of his dad growing up. And I wrote him letters for when he starts big school, and letters when a letter when he graduates from high school and from college, and when he meets the woman he wants to marry, and the things that I consider important and my hopes for him in life. He's way too little, to understand, but I'm hoping it gave me, because not being able to see him grow up is probably the hardest part of this. And it gave me something to do to create memories and let him know my thoughts of things, because I want him to know me, even though I won't be around.
And what you've given me, Kay, and I thank you very much for it, is like a lot of food for thought, because again, these are things that people can think about at any point in time in their life, so they don't have to wait until somebody's terminally ill or they're in the situation themselves. A lot of this is just things we should be thinking about now and just be open to the possibility. So just, like I said, thank you for being my guest today, but also for this great book you've written. I encourage people to get it. I'd also like to remind people to try to get to that presentation that Kae's giving at the Weaverville Center. And lastly, I'd like to thank my producer, Kathy DeSetti, for putting together the program. And Kae, like I said, hopefully we'll bump into each other somehow, or I should use your advice, be concrete about it. So I will be concrete about it and say that I will send you the link to this interview probably tomorrow. And again, I really appreciate you being my guest on this show. Thanks much.
You're very welcome.
Okay, great.